I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at my phone as if it had just burst into flames. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a single text from my sister Valeria that would shatter my world. He proposed. I said yes. Can't wait to tell you everything. My name is Yolanda, and 6 weeks ago, Vicente was my boyfriend of 3 years. Now he's my sister's fiancé. This can't be happening, I whispered, gripping the counter to steady myself. The room started spinning, and I felt bile rising in my throat. The fancy coffee maker Vicente had bought me for Christmas caught my eye, mocking me with memories of lazy Sunday mornings and whispered promises. My phone buzzed again. Mom. Honey, did you hear the wonderful news? Her voice was pitched high with excitement. Just now, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. Val texted me. Isn't it wonderful? Your sister getting married. And to Vicente, such a catch. We're all meeting for dinner tonight at Palazzo to celebrate. 7 o'clock sharp. Of course we were, because in my family, every milestone had to be celebrated immediately, publicly, and with maximum fanfare. Especially when it was Valeria's milestone. Mom, I don't think... No excuses, Yolanda. This is your sister's moment. We need the whole family there. The whole family. To celebrate my ex-boyfriend marrying my sister. I ended the call and slumped against the refrigerator, sliding down until I hit the floor. My best friend Eleanor picked up on the first ring. Tell me you're not going. I have to, I said, running my fingers through my hair. You know how my family is. Screw your family. He was your boyfriend 6 weeks ago. This is beyond messed up. I closed my eyes, remembering the night Vicente ended things. I need space, he'd said. Time to figure out what I want. Apparently, what he wanted was my younger sister. I'm coming over, Eleanor declared. We'll get drunk and burn his stuff. No time. Family dinner at 7. I glanced at my watch. I have 2 hours to pull myself together and face them. Yolanda, please. I'll be fine, I lied, standing up and straightening my shoulders. I'm a professional event planner. I can handle one dinner. At Palazzo, Valeria was already holding court at our usual table, Vicente by her side. My sister looked radiant, her perfect smile gleaming as she showed off the ring, a princess-cut diamond that caught the light with every gesture. Mom and Dad beamed at her like she'd just won another pageant. Yolanda, Valeria squealed, jumping up to hug me. I'm so happy you're here. I hugged her back mechanically, avoiding Vicente's eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his water glass. Let me see that ring, I heard myself say, the words coming out hollow but convincing. Years of managing difficult clients had taught me how to fake enthusiasm. Isn't it perfect? Valeria gushed. Vicente picked it himself. I nodded, noting it was exactly the style I'd once told him I hated. A coincidence? Or a message? We want a winter wedding, Valeria announced as we ordered. December is perfect, don't you think? December? Mom frowned. That's only 6 months away. Can you plan something that quickly? Before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. I'll do it. The table fell silent. Vicente's head snapped up, finally meeting my gaze. You'll plan our wedding? Valeria asked, her eyes wide. Of course, I smiled, the plan forming even as I spoke. You're my sister. I want everything to be perfect for you. And who better than a professional? Oh, honey, we couldn't ask you to, Mom started. I insist, I cut her off. Consider it my gift to you both. I'll handle everything. Valeria squealed again, launching into a list of ideas and preferences. Vicente remained silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Worry? Guilt? Fear? He should be afraid, because as I sat there, nodding and smiling at my sister's wedding dreams, I was already planning something else entirely. Every event has its pressure points, the small details that can make or break a celebration. As Hawaii's most sought-after wedding planner, I knew them all. Trust me, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze Valeria's hand. I'll make sure everyone sees exactly what they need to see. My sister beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. but Vicente caught it. I saw him swallow hard, his hand tightening around his fork. Good. Let him sweat. Because this wedding wouldn't just be about celebrating their love, it would be about exposing the ugly truth beneath all our family's perfect facades. And by the time I was done, everyone would finally see what had been hiding in plain sight all along. I raised my wine glass, offering a toast. To the happy couple, I said, my smile never wavering. May you get everything you deserve. So, have you two discussed your budget? I asked, opening my laptop at Valeria's kitchen table. 1 week into planning, and already the cracks were showing. Valeria and Vicente exchanged glances. Well, my sister started, we were thinking around 50,000. I kept my face neutral, but I knew that number was impossible for Vicente. Last month, he'd been stressed about making his car payments. Now he was supposed to fund a luxury wedding. That's ambitious, I said carefully, especially for December. Premium venues charge double during holiday season. Vicente's jaw tightened. Money won't be an issue. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Because the deposit for the venue alone will be 10,000. Due next week. The color drained from his face. Valeria, absorbed in her phone, didn't notice. Oh my God, look at the centerpiece idea. She thrust her phone at me. We could do something like this, right? I glanced at the photo. Those are imported peonies. In December, they'll cost about 300 per arrangement. You'd need at least 20 tables. 6,000 for flowers, Vicente choked out. That's just centerpieces, I said sweetly. We haven't discussed the arch, the aisle arrangements, or the bridal bouquet. Valeria waved her hand dismissively. Whatever it takes, this is our special day. I watched Vicente's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Maybe we should consider something more intimate. Intimate? Valeria's head snapped up. What do you mean, intimate? I just think, you promised me my dream wedding. Valeria's voice rose sharply. You said money wouldn't be a problem. It won't be, he assured her quickly. I'll figure it out. I typed notes into my laptop, hiding my satisfaction. First crack in the facade. Vicente's finances. Moving on, I said brightly. Let's talk guest list. Valeria pulled out her phone again. I have about 300 names. 300? Vicente's voice cracked. Just on my side, Valeria continued. How many were you thinking? Vicente slumped in his chair. Maybe 50? 50? Valeria laughed. That's barely your immediate family. What about all your work colleagues? I watched Vicente shift uncomfortably. Actually, I'd rather not invite people from work. Interesting. Very interesting. Why not? I asked innocently. Aren't you up for partner at your firm? Vicente's eyes darted to mine, a warning in them. It's complicated. What's complicated? Valeria frowned. You told me the partnership was practically guaranteed. It is, he said quickly. I just don't want to mix business and pleasure. I pulled up another spreadsheet. Well, we need to finalize numbers soon for the catering deposit. At 350 guests, we're looking at around 20,000 for food and beverage minimum. Vicente stood up abruptly. I need some air. As he practically fled to the balcony, Valeria turned to me with tears in her eyes. What's wrong with him? He's been so weird about money lately. Has he? I asked, careful to keep my tone concerned. That must be stressful for you. It's like he's a different person, she sniffled. Last week, he got really upset when I mentioned wanting to look at houses after the wedding. He never used to care about spending money. Because he was spending my money, I thought bitterly. But I just reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm sure he's just nervous about the wedding. It's a big commitment. You don't think... Valeria lowered her voice, glancing at the balcony. You don't think he's having second thoughts, do you? Of course not, I lied. He'd be crazy to let you go. Like he let me go. The words hung unspoken between us. Valeria wiped her eyes. I'm so glad you're helping us, Yolanda. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd probably still be single, I thought. But I just smiled and pulled up another spreadsheet. Let's look at some venue options. I have an appointment at the Royal Hawaiian tomorrow at 10. Their ballroom would be perfect. The Royal Hawaiian? Vicente had returned, looking slightly green. Isn't that the most expensive hotel on the island? Only the best for my sister, I said firmly. Unless, is there a reason we shouldn't look there? Our eyes met, and I saw the panic in his. He knew I knew, about the mounting debt, about the partnership that wasn't happening, about all the lies he'd told Valeria. No, he said finally, no reason at all. Perfect. I closed my laptop with a snap. I'll see you both there tomorrow at 10. Oh, and Vicente, don't forget about that venue deposit. We wouldn't want to lose our date. As I walked to my car, I could feel Vicente's eyes boring into my back. He was beginning to realize what I was doing, but he was powerless to stop it. After all, how could he object to me giving his bride-to-be exactly what she wanted? By the time this wedding rolled around, everyone would know exactly who Vicente really was. And more importantly, they'd know what Valeria had done to get him. I smiled as I started my car. The truth was going to cost them way more than $50,000. You're playing with fire, Eleanor warned, watching me sort through old family photos. This isn't like you, Yolanda. You don't know what it was like growing up with her, I said, pulling out a particularly telling picture. Valeria's high school graduation. She's center stage, beaming, while I'm barely visible in the background, holding her purse. Tell me then. The front door opened before I could answer. Mom breezed in, carrying garment bags. Girls, I'm so glad you're both here. Wait until you see what Valeria picked for the bridesmaids. Eleanor shot me a concerned look as Mom unzipped the bags with flourish, revealing identical seafoam green dresses. Aren't they gorgeous? Mom gushed. They're the exact color of the dress I wore to my senior prom, I said quietly. The one Valeria borrowed and accidentally ruined the night before. Mom's smile faltered. Oh, honey, that was years ago. You can't still be upset about that. Of course not, I said, standing up. Just like I'm not upset about her taking my spot in the dance recital when I broke my ankle, or dating my prom date 2 weeks after he broke up with me, or, that's enough, Mum snapped. Your sister is getting married. Can't you just be happy for her? I'm planning her entire wedding for free. What more do you want? The silence stretched between us until Eleanor cleared her throat. Mrs. Hamilton, would you like some coffee? Mom's phone buzzed. No time. I'm meeting Valeria at the florist. She headed for the door, then paused. Yolanda, please don't ruin this for your sister. After she left, Eleanor turned to me. Okay, spill. What really happened with Vicente? I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a saved text thread. 3 days before he broke up with me, I found this on his phone. Eleanor read the messages between Vicente and Valeria, her eyes widening. Holy shit, they were seeing each other behind your back. For months, I confirmed. And the best part? She knew exactly what she was doing. Look at the timestamp on this one. The message read, she'll get over it just like she gets over everything. You're meant to be with me, not her. That manipulative little... It gets better, I interrupted, pulling up my laptop. Remember how Vicente kept dodging questions about work? Well, I did some digging. I showed her the law firm's website. See that press release? The one announcing new partners. Notice who's not on the list. But he told everyone he was getting promoted. He's not just not getting promoted, he's being investigated for ethical violations. Apparently, he's been padding his billable hours for months. That's why he doesn't want work people at the wedding. Eleanor whistled low. Does Valeria know? Please, she's too busy planning her perfect wedding to notice he can barely afford dinner. My phone buzzed, a text from the florist. Speaking of which, I smiled, reading the message. Remember those imported peonies Valeria had to have? Looks like there's been a mix-up with the order. They'll have to use local flowers instead. You didn't. I just mentioned to the supplier that payment might be delayed. Amazing how quickly exotic flowers become unavailable when there are doubts about money. Eleanor grabbed my arm. Yolanda, stop. This isn't going to make you feel better. You don't understand, I said, pulling away. This isn't about feeling better. It's about finally showing everyone who Valeria really is. And who's that? A spoiled, selfish little girl who's about to marry a man she stole from her sister, a man who's lying to her about everything. My phone buzzed again. Valeria. The flowers are ruined, she wailed when I answered. Everything's ruined. You have to fix this. Take a deep breath, I said soothingly. I'll handle it. You promise? Of course. That's what sisters are for, right? I ended the call and caught Eleanor staring at me. What? I've known you since college, she said slowly. I've never seen this side of you. Maybe it's always been there, I shrugged. Maybe Valeria just finally pushed me too far. My phone lit up with another text. Vicente this time. Need to talk, privately. The plot thickens, I murmured, showing Eleanor the message. Don't go, she pleaded. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth it. But I was already grabbing my keys. That's where you're wrong. It's worth everything. Because what Eleanor didn't understand, what no one understood, was that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself. About showing my family that their perfect princess wasn't so perfect after all. I'll call you later, I promised, heading for the door. Yolanda, Eleanor called after me. Just remember, karma works both ways. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Good. Then they should both get exactly what they deserve. As I walked to my car, I pulled up the venue contract on my phone. One small change to the payment deadline, and Vicente's house of cards would start tumbling down. Sometimes karma needs a little help. Vicente was already waiting at our old meeting spot, the quiet coffee shop near the beach where we used to spend Sunday mornings. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes, and his usually pristine shirt wrinkled. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down. You have 5 minutes. He leaned forward, voice low. I know what you're doing, Yolanda. Planning my sister's dream wedding? Yes, everyone knows that. The venue deposit deadline suddenly moving up. The flower order mysteriously falling through. The caterer accidentally doubling their prices. I sipped my coffee. Sounds like typical wedding planning challenges to me. Stop it, he hissed. You're trying to expose me. Expose what, Vicente? Your financial problems, your issues at work, or the fact that you were sleeping with my sister while we were still together. He flinched. It wasn't like that. No. Show me your phone then. Let me see when those texts with Valeria really started. I can't. He trailed off, looking away. Can't or won't. The barista approached with more coffee, and we sat in tense silence until she left. What do you want? Vicente finally asked. Money? I laughed. I want you to squirm. I want you to feel what it's like to have everything falling apart around you while you smile and pretend everything's fine. You'll hurt Valeria too. She should have thought about that before she went after her sister's boyfriend. His phone buzzed. Valeria's smiling face lit up the screen. He declined the call. Trouble in paradise? I asked sweetly. She's stressed about the wedding. She should be. The rehearsal dinner venue just called. Apparently their credit card verification failed. Vicente's face went pale. You didn't. I didn't do anything, but you might want to check your credit score. He stood up abruptly. This has to stop. Or what? You'll tell Valeria the truth. About the affair. About your job. About the money you've been borrowing from loan sharks. His jaw dropped. How did you... I'm very good at my job, Vicente. Part of being a successful event planner is knowing everything about your clients. Please, he whispered. I'll call off the wedding. No, you won't, I said, standing up. Because then everyone would know you're a fraud. And we can't have that, can we? I left him sitting there, head in his hands. But my victory felt hollow as I drove to the rehearsal dinner venue. The maitre d' greeted me warmly. I'd brought him plenty of business over the years. Ms. Pierce, here to check the arrangements. Just confirming everything's set for next week's rehearsal dinner. Ah, yes, he hesitated. About that. We had some concerns about the payment. Don't worry, I smiled. I'm handling everything personally now. My phone buzzed. Mom again. I answered reluctantly. The bridesmaids are in tears, she exclaimed. The dresses came in 3 sizes too small. That's impossible, I said. I double-checked all the measurements myself. Well, something's wrong, and the makeup artist just cancelled. I'll take care of it. You better. This wedding has to be perfect. I ended the call and leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. Eleanor's words echoed in my head. Karma works both ways. My phone buzzed again. A text from Valeria. Can we talk? Alone? 20 minutes later, I found her sitting on our childhood beach, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. I'm scared, she whispered as I sat beside her. Of what? Everything. Vicente's been so distant. The wedding keeps having problems. And... She turned to me, tears in her eyes. I don't deserve your help. Not after what I did. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? I knew he was yours. I knew it was wrong. But I always wanted what you had. So you took him, she nodded, wiping her eyes. I thought if I could just have this one thing, this perfect life you always seem to have, everything would finally feel right. I almost laughed. My perfect life? You're so successful, so confident. Everyone respects you. I'm just the pretty sister, the one who takes things that don't belong to her. For a moment, I saw us as children again. Valeria always reaching for my toys, my friends, my spotlight, always needing to prove she was better. The makeup artist didn't really cancel, did she? She asked quietly. No. And the dresses? They'll be fixed by tomorrow. She nodded slowly. You're punishing us. Yes. We deserve it. The simple admission caught me off guard. I'd expected her to fight back, to deny everything. Instead, she just looked broken. What do you want me to do? She whispered. I stood up, brushing sand from my clothes. I want you to go through with this wedding, Valeria. I want you to get exactly what you fought so hard for. As I walked away, I heard her start to cry. But for the first time since this all began, victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. The rehearsal dinner was a powder keg waiting to explode. I could feel it as I adjusted the place cards, making sure Vicente's parents sat directly across from the senior partner of his law firm, the one who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about those billable hours. Everything looks perfect, Blair, Valeria's best friend, gushed. You're literally the best sister ever. If she only knew. Guests started arriving, and I watched Vicente's face drain of color when he saw his boss. What's he doing here? Oh, didn't Valeria tell you? I smiled. She insisted on inviting him, said it would be rude not to include someone so important to your career. Vicente grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. You did this on purpose. I just followed the guest list. I extracted my arm from his grip. Better go say hello. He's looking this way. The evening progressed exactly as I'd orchestrated. The wine flowed freely, tongues loosened, and the carefully constructed lies began to unravel. So, Vicente, his boss called out during the main course, tell everyone about that big Morgan case you've been handling. Vicente choked on his wine. The one you logged 60 billable hours for last week. The table fell silent. I took a slow sip of water, watching. 60 hours? Valeria frowned. But you were with me most of last week. I worked from home, Vicente said quickly. Funny, his boss continued, because the client called yesterday, said they hadn't heard from you in 3 weeks. More silence. I could practically hear Vicente's heart pounding. I can explain. I'm sure you can. His boss cut him off. In fact, I insist you explain. In my office, Monday morning. Valeria's face had gone from confused to horrified. Vicente, what's going on? Before he could answer, my mother jumped in with forced cheerfulness. Who's ready for dessert? Yolanda, help me serve. In the kitchen, Mom rounded on me. What are you doing? Serving dessert, apparently. Don't play innocent. I see what's happening here. Do you? I challenged. Do you finally see what's really going on? I see my daughter trying to ruin her sister's happiness. Her happiness? I laughed bitterly. You mean her stolen happiness? Stolen? What are you… The kitchen door burst open. Valeria stood there, mascara running down her face. Did you know, she demanded, about Vicente's job? Val, honey, Mom started. Not you, her. Valeria pointed at me. Did you know? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? She deflated, sinking into a kitchen chair. No, just like you didn't believe me when I tried to tell you about Marcus in high school. I froze. What? Your first boyfriend, the one you caught with me at that party. I tried to tell you he'd been pursuing me for weeks. You didn't want to hear it. That was different. Was it? She looked up at me. We've been hurting each other for so long, we don't even remember how it started. Mom looked between us, realization dawning. Valeria, Vicente wasn't just Yolanda's ex-boyfriend, was he? Valeria shook her head, fresh tears falling. The kitchen door opened again. Eleanor this time. You might want to get back out there. Vicente's father is asking about the wedding budget, and things are getting heated. We returned to find Vicente and his father in a shouting match. $50,000, his father roared. Where exactly do you think that money's coming from? I'll figure it out. Like you figured out those billing hours. That's enough. Valeria's voice cut through the chaos. She stood, hands shaking. The wedding's off. The room erupted. Vicente lunged forward. Baby, no. Don't touch me. She stepped back. You lied to me about everything. I did it for us. No, she said quietly. You did it for you, just like I pursued you for me. We're both selfish, terrible people. She turned to me. I'm sorry, Yolanda, for everything. Not just Vicente, for all of it. The room fell silent again, all eyes moving between us. I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd wanted, the truth exposed, their perfect facade shattered. But watching my little sister's world crumble, I felt nothing but hollow. Valeria, I started. No, she cut me off. Don't try to fix this. You've been fixing my messes our whole lives. Let me face this one on my own. She pulled off her engagement ring and set it on the table. I hope you all enjoy dessert. I heard my sister made it herself. Everything she does is perfect after all. As she walked out, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the window. Two sisters, standing amid the wreckage of years of competition and resentment. I barely recognized either of us. Mom touched my arm. Are you happy now? I watched Vicente slump in his chair, his father still raging, his boss making notes on his phone. I watched Blair comfort Valeria's college friends, all of them shooting accusing glances my way. No, I whispered. I'm not happy at all. 3 days after the rehearsal dinner disaster, I found myself sitting in Dad's study, surrounded by old photo albums. He stood in the doorway, watching me. Your mother's not speaking to you, he said finally. I noticed. Valeria's moved back home. I heard. He sighed, settling into his leather chair. Remember when you girls were little? You used to be inseparable. I picked up a photo, Valeria and me building sandcastles, maybe age 6 and 10. What happened to us, Dad? We did, Mum's voice came from behind us. She looked tired, older somehow. Your father and I happened to you. What do you mean? She sat down heavily. We always made everything a competition. Grades, looks, achievements. We thought we were motivating you both to excel. Instead, you taught us to tear each other down, I finished. Yes. She picked up another photo, Valeria's high school graduation. Look at this. I always focused on Valeria in the center, but now I see you in the background. The way you're looking at her. With hatred, I admitted. With hurt, Dad corrected. We did that. We made you feel less than. My phone buzzed. Eleanor. They're cancelling all the wedding vendors, her text read. Vicente's apparently filing for bankruptcy. Good, I muttered. Is it? Mom asked. Is any of this good? Before I could answer, the front door slammed. Valeria appeared in the doorway, looking wild-eyed. Vicente's being fired, she announced, and possibly prosecuted for fraud. Val, I started. Don't. She held up her hand. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I need to say something. She took a deep breath. I've been awful. To everyone, but especially to you, Yolanda. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was better than you, and all I proved was that I'm worse in every way that matters. That's not true, I said automatically. It is. You build things. Beautiful events, successful businesses, real relationships. I just take things. Other people's boyfriends, other people's moments, other people's dreams. Mom stood up. Sweetheart, please let me finish. Valeria's voice cracked. I knew Vicente was lying about his job. I knew he was in financial trouble. But I wanted the fairy tale so badly, I convinced myself it didn't matter. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I wanted to win. Just once I wanted to have something you couldn't top. Dad cleared his throat. We should have stopped this pattern years ago. You couldn't, I said. We were too busy fighting each other to listen. Well, I'm listening now, Valeria said. And I need to know, did you plan all this? The rehearsal dinner, Vicente's boss, everything? I met her eyes. Yes, she nodded slowly. Good. Good? I needed someone to stop me, to stop us. This whole thing was built on lies and competition and hurt. It needed to end. Mom started crying softly. My girls, what have we done to you? We can fix this, Dad said firmly. All of us together. Can we? I asked. After everything? Valeria moved closer, picking up the sandcastle photo. Remember this day? We spent hours building that castle. Then the tide came in. And we built another one, I remembered. Higher up the beach. Better than the first, she added, because we learned from our mistakes. My phone buzzed again, Vicente calling. I declined it. He keeps trying to contact me too, Valeria said, saying we can still make it work. And I told him the truth, that I never loved him the way you did. I just loved winning. The admission hung in the air between us. I did love him, I said quietly, but I think I hated you more. I know. She reached for my hand. Can we start over? Not as competitors, but as sisters? Mom wiped her eyes. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Dad said. I looked at Valeria, really looked at her. Behind the perfect makeup and designer clothes, I saw something I'd missed before. A scared little girl who'd spent her whole life trying to measure up to an impossible standard. Just like me. Okay, I said finally, but no more lies, no more competition. We deal with things honestly from now on. Deal. Valeria squeezed my hand, starting with cancelling everything for this wedding. Will you help me? Of course, that's what sisters are for. And maybe, she added hesitantly, after that, you could help me figure out who I am without all the drama. I think I forgot somewhere along the way. Mum stood up, pulling us both into a hug. We'll all help. No more picking favourites, no more comparing, just family. Just family, Dad echoed, joining the embrace. Standing there, surrounded by old photos and new promises, I felt something shift. The anger that had driven me for so long began to fade, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like hope. Maybe Eleanor was right about karma, but maybe she was also right about something else. Sometimes the best revenge is letting go and moving forward. Together. You're sure about this? I asked Valeria as we stood outside the Royal Hawaiian. We can send an email instead. No, she squared her shoulders. I need to do this in person. We found the wedding coordinator, Maria, in her office. Her smile faltered when she saw us both. Is everything all right? We just received the final deposit from Mr. Lawson this morning. Valeria's head snapped toward me. What? He must have borrowed more money, I said quietly. That's exactly why we need to stop this now. Valeria turned to Maria. I'm calling off the wedding. Maria's professional mask didn't slip. I see. Well, as per the contract, the deposit is non-refundable. We know, I interrupted, but maybe we can work something out. Like what? Like using the deposit and venue for something else. I pulled out my tablet. What if, instead of a wedding, we host a charity gala? All proceeds going to financial literacy education for young adults. Maria raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. Think about it, Valeria jumped in. A story about turning personal tragedy into community benefit. The press would love it. I smiled, watching my sister pitch the idea with genuine enthusiasm. This was a side of her I'd never seen before. We could even get Vicente's former firm to match donations, she continued. They'd jump at the chance for some positive PR right now. Maria looked between us. Give me an hour to make some calls. In the hotel lobby, Valeria collapsed onto a plush sofa. That was terrifying. You were amazing. Really? She looked surprised. I felt like I was going to throw up. Welcome to my world. Every event planning meeting ever. She laughed, then suddenly stopped. Vicente's here. I turned to see him striding across the lobby, looking desperate. Val, baby, we need to talk. No. She stood up. We don't. I got the money. I can make this work. From where? I asked. More loan sharks? He flinched. That's none of your business. Actually, it is, Valeria said firmly, because you're still trying to hurt my sister. What? I'm trying to marry you. Exactly. You're using me to punish her, just like I used you to compete with her. We're toxic, Vicente, but I love you. No, you don't. You love what I represent, a chance to prove you're better than Yolanda. But you're not, and neither am I. Security was approaching, drawn by Vicente's rising voice. Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave. This isn't over, he warned as they led him away. Actually, it is, Valeria called after him. I choose my sister. We watched him disappear through the revolving doors. You okay? I asked. No, she admitted, but I will be. Maria reappeared. Ladies, the hotel management loves your gala idea. They're willing to transfer the deposit and give us a discount on catering if we can get 3 local news stations to cover it. Done, I said. I know just who to call. Perfect. Maria handed us revised contracts. Now, about the theme. Actually, Valeria interrupted, I think Yolanda should handle that. She's the expert. You sure? Positive. I'm done trying to control everything. She smiled. Besides, I have something else to focus on. What's that? Remember how you always said I'd be good in sales? Well, there's an opening at your friend Eleanor's company. Val, you don't have to. I want to. I want to build something of my own, not just take things from others. Maria cleared her throat. Should I give you 2 a moment? No, I said, pulling out my planning notebook. We're good. Let's talk themes. As we worked through the details, I watched Valeria taking notes, asking smart questions, genuinely engaging without trying to dominate. It felt like meeting my sister for the first time. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom. Everything okay? I snapped a photo of Valeria and me, heads bent over the planning table, and sent it back. Better than okay, I wrote. We're building something new. Later, walking along the beach behind the hotel, Valeria stopped suddenly. Remember when we used to dream about having our weddings here? You mean when you used to announce you'd have the bigger, better wedding? She winced. I was awful, wasn't I? We both were, but maybe that's what happens when you're raised to see your sister as competition instead of an ally. Well, I like being allies better. She linked her arm through mine, even if it means giving up the perfect beach wedding. Who needs a perfect wedding when you can have a kick-ass charity gala? She laughed. True, though I have to ask, did you really orchestrate everything to fall apart, or did karma just take over? I watched the sunset paint the waves gold. Maybe a bit of both. Sometimes the universe knows what we need better than we do. And what do we need? Each other, I said simply. No competition, no rivalry, just sisters. She squeezed my arm. I like the sound of that. The Royal Hawaiian's ballroom sparkled with golden light as I adjusted the last centerpiece. Not peonies. We'd gone with local plumerias instead, their sweet scent filling the air. "Everything's perfect," Eleanor said, joining me. "You've outdone yourself." "We've outdone ourselves," I corrected, watching Valeria direct the catering staff with newfound confidence. I couldn't have done this without her. The Building Better Futures charity gala had sold out weeks ago. Local news crews were already setting up their cameras, eager to cover the story of two sisters who turned a cancelled wedding into a community benefit. "Have you seen the guest list?" Eleanor asked. "Half the business community in Hawaii is here." "Including Vicente's former boss," I nodded, who, by the way, pledged to match all donations tonight. Karma's funny that way. Mom and Dad arrived early, both looking nervous but proud. "Girls," Mom called out, "come here a moment." We gathered in a quiet corner. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been doing some thinking, and some therapy." "Dad," Valeria laughed, "you hate therapy." "I do, but I hate what we did to you both more." He pulled out an envelope. "This was supposed to be your wedding gift, Val. Instead, we'd like it to be something else." Inside was a check, a substantial one. "We're funding a scholarship," Mom explained, "the Pierce Sisters Foundation, for young women entrepreneurs. Starting with the proceeds from tonight," Dad added. "If you want." Valeria and I exchanged looks. "Only if we can run it together," I said. "As equals," Valeria added. Mom started crying. Dad just smiled. The ballroom filled quickly. I spotted Vicente's parents slipping in quietly, heads down. They'd called Valeria yesterday, apologizing for their son's behavior and asking to support the cause. "Let them," Valeria had said. "Healing works better than hatred." Now she approached the podium, hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. "Welcome, everyone. I'm Valeria Pierce, and this was supposed to be my wedding day." The room fell silent. Instead, it's become something far more meaningful. Tonight isn't about one couple's failed relationship. It's about building bridges instead of burning them. About turning competition into cooperation. She gestured to me. "My sister Yolanda taught me that. Not through lectures or criticism, but by showing me there's more power in lifting each other up than in tearing each other down." I felt tears threatening, but held them back. This was her moment. The money raised tonight will fund education programs, teaching financial literacy and entrepreneurship, because everyone deserves a chance to build their own success story. Applause filled the room. I saw Eleanor wiping her eyes, Mom and Dad holding hands, even Vicente's parents looking moved. "And now," Valeria continued, "I'd like to introduce our first success story. Starting Monday, I'll be joining Elite Marketing as their new sales director, under the mentorship of Eleanor Foster." More applause. Eleanor had been skeptical about hiring Valeria at first, but my sister's natural charm and newfound work ethic had won her over during the interviews. "But before we begin the fundraising, I have one more announcement." Valeria's voice softened. "Yolanda, could you join me up here?" Confused, I walked to the podium. My sister is Hawaii's premier event planner. Everyone knows this. What they don't know is that she's also the strongest person I've ever met, strong enough to forgive me, strong enough to help me become better. She turned to face me directly, "Which is why I'm announcing tonight that I'm investing my savings into becoming your business partner, if you'll have me." The room gasped. I stared at her. "What?" "Pierce and Pierce events," she said. "You handle the planning, I handle the client relations. Together." I looked out at the crowd, at all these people who'd come to support our transformation from rivals to partners, at our parents who were learning to celebrate our differences instead of comparing them, at Eleanor, who'd believed in both of us. "Together," I agreed, hugging my sister as the room erupted in cheers. Later, as the gala wound down and the donation total exceeded our wildest expectations, Valeria and I slipped out to the beach. The same beach where we'd once built sandcastles, where we'd later fought over boys and dreams and our parents' attention. "Think we'll ever fully heal?" she asked. I think we already are, I said, watching the waves. Every day we choose to support each other, instead of compete, we heal a little more. Even with Vicente. He made his choices. We made ours. She nodded, then laughed suddenly. Remember how you used to say I'd never make it on my own? Remember how you used to say I was boring and uptight? We were both wrong. We were both hurt. She took my hand. Not anymore. The night air filled with the sound of waves and distant music from the gala. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Learning to work together, navigating our changing family dynamics, building something meaningful from the ashes of what we'd burned down. But tonight, standing hand in hand with my sister, I finally understood. Sometimes the happy ending isn't a perfect wedding or a flawless revenge. Sometimes it's simply learning to stand beside the person who once stood in your way. And that's more than enough.
I'm Zoe, and if someone had told me 4 years ago that my marriage would be hanging by a thread, I'd have laughed in disbelief. But here I am, sitting alone in what used to be our shared bedroom, thinking about where it all went wrong. It was a regular evening at the Hendersons, my in-laws. The dining room was always too warm, and Mrs. Henderson's cooking was, well, an acquired taste. My husband, Michael, was always quiet during these dinners, probably trying to avoid any drama. Zoe, dear, could you pass the salt? Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through my thoughts. I obliged, trying to smile. So, Zoe, she started, eyeing me like a cat does a mouse. How's your little job at the boutique going? It's going well, Mrs. Henderson. We just got a new line of summer dresses in, I replied, trying to sound upbeat. That's nice. A real career woman, she said, the sarcasm dripping from each word. Michael shot me a look, his way of saying, just ignore her. The conversation was superficial until Mrs. Henderson, with a glass of wine in hand, decided it was time to drop her bombshell. You know, Michael, Jenna called me the other day. She's doing so well. Just got promoted at her law firm. Michael's fork paused midair. Mom, we've been over this. Oh, I'm just saying, it's nice to see young people making something of themselves. Not that running a boutique isn't quaint, she said, her eyes on me. I felt my face flush with anger. Before I could respond, Michael intervened. Mom, Zoe's doing great at her job. Let's not start this again. Mrs. Henderson shrugged, I'm just speaking my mind. It's a mother's right, isn't it? The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence. I helped with the dishes, more out of obligation than desire. Mrs. Henderson watched me like a hawk, commenting on everything from the way I stacked the dishes to how I wiped the counter. Zoe, you're doing it all wrong. Here, let me, she said, snatching the dishcloth from my hand. Honestly, I don't know what kids these days are taught at home. I bit my tongue, counting the seconds until we could leave. Michael was silent, his usual response to his mother's antics. It was like he put on blinders whenever we were around her. On the drive home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Michael, your mother is impossible. She criticizes everything I do. Can't you see that? Michael sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. She's just set in her ways, Zoe. You know how she is. But it's always about me. She never misses a chance to put me down. And you just sit there and let her. Zoe, please. Let's not do this now. She's my mom. What do you expect me to do? I stared out the window, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Stand up for me, maybe? Just once. Life after that dinner at the Hendersons took a nosedive. It was like living in a slow-moving nightmare. I tried to shake off the feeling, but Mrs. Henderson's words, her disapproval, clung to me like a bad smell. Michael and I were like two ships passing in the night. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, were now just about the mundane, bills, groceries, the weather. I missed him, even though he was right there. One evening, I decided to cook Michael's favorite, spaghetti bolognese. I was in the kitchen, lost in the rhythm of chopping and stirring, when Michael walked in, home from work. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd make your favorite tonight." He glanced at the pot and then at me. "Thanks, but I'm not really hungry." I frowned. "You sure? I can keep it warm for later." He shrugged. "Maybe. I've got some stuff to do in the study." As he walked away, I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. I served myself a plate and ate alone at the kitchen table. The next weekend, we were back at his parents' place. I braced myself for another round with Mrs. Henderson. She didn't disappoint. "Zoe, have you gained a bit of weight?" she asked, eyeing me up and down. I clenched my teeth. "I don't think so, Mrs. Henderson." She's scared. "You should watch that. Men like Michael need a wife who takes care of herself." Before I could reply, Michael cut in. "Mom, please." "What?" "I'm just looking out for her," she said, her tone innocent. But the damage was done. The rest of the visit was a blur. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Things didn't improve. Every visit to his parents was a test of my patience. Mrs. Henderson's digs at me became more frequent, more personal. And Michael, he just retreated further into his shell. I started spending more time at work, staying late just to avoid going home to an empty house. My boss noticed and appreciated the extra effort, but it was just a distraction from my crumbling marriage. It was during one of those late nights at work when I got a text from Michael. "Eating with Mom and Dad tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my heart sinking. It was happening again, he was choosing them over me. Over us. I didn't wait up. I couldn't. The loneliness and frustration were too much. I cried myself to sleep that night, mourning the loss of what we once had, fearing what our future might hold. The tension at home was like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Michael and I had been reduced to grunts and nods, barely acknowledging each other's presence. It was a far cry from the love-filled days we used to know. It was late on a Tuesday when things finally blew up. I was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, trying to find some distraction, when Michael walked in, his face like a thundercloud. "Zoe, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. I put the magazine down, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Okay, what's up?" He took a deep breath. "It's about my mom. She called today. She's upset." I rolled my eyes. "What is it this time?" "She said you were rude to her last time we visited. That you ignored her and were disrespectful." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rude? Disrespectful? Michael, she's been nothing but mean to me since day one. And you expect me to just take it? He frowned. "She's my mother, Zoe. You could at least try to get along with her." "Try? I've been trying for years. But it's never good enough for her, or for you, it seems." Michael's face turned red. "That's not fair, Zoe. I'm stuck in the middle here. I'm doing my best." "Your best?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your best is letting her walk all over me. Your best is taking her side every single time." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "What do you want me to do, Zoe? Cut her out of my life? She's all I have left of my family. And what about me? Am I not your family too?" He shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "You just don't get it." "No, Michael, you don't get it. You don't see how much this is hurting me. How much you're hurting me." We stood there, glaring at each other, the years of unsaid frustrations boiling over. It felt like a dam had burst, and all the anger and hurt came pouring out. "Maybe you're just like her," he finally said, his voice cold. "Maybe she's right about you." That hit me like a slap in the face. Right about me? You think I'm the problem here? He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, shaking with anger and disbelief. That night, we slept in separate rooms. The gap between us had turned into a chasm, and I had no idea how to bridge it. I lay awake, replaying the argument over and over in my head, each time feeling more lost and alone. The next morning, the house was like a battlefield, silent and tense. We avoided each other, moving around in a strained dance of avoidance. I left for work early, the need to escape the oppressive atmosphere overwhelming. At my desk, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the argument, to Michael's words. It felt like we had reached a point of no return, and I didn't know how to feel about it. When I got home that evening, the house was empty. Michael's car wasn't in the driveway. I went inside, the silence enveloping me like a cold blanket. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling a deep sense of despair. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Michael. I checked my phone, but there were no messages, no missed calls. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I went to bed that night, but sleep was elusive. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fears, and what-ifs. The realization that our marriage was crumbling was like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. And as the clock ticked away, marking the passing of another sleepless night, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the end of the road for us. If the love we once had was lost forever in a sea of misunderstandings and unspoken words. Alone. That's how the house felt since Michael left. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of the gaping hole where our relationship used to be. I tried to keep busy, to fill the void with anything I could. But the emptiness was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Then came the day that changed everything. I was on my way to the grocery store when it happened. A sudden crash, a blur of motion, and then darkness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, the sterile white of the room assaulting my senses. The doctor's words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I'm sorry, but the injury to your spine, it's severe. Walking again might not be possible." I lay there, stunned. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when my life was already in pieces. But it was happening. And when I finally returned home, it was to a reality I wasn't prepared for. The house felt even emptier, the walls echoing with the life I used to have. I refused to let despair take hold. I started doing exercises every day, determined to prove the doctors wrong. I would sit in my wheelchair, pushing my legs to move, to feel something, anything. And then there was the painting. I hadn't picked up a brush since I was a teenager, but now, it became my escape. I'd lose myself in the colors and strokes, creating worlds where I was whole again, where my life wasn't defined by the confines of my wheelchair. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. There were days when I wanted to give up, to succumb to the sorrow that threatened to overwhelm me. But I kept going, clinging to the hope that one day, I might stand on my own 2 feet again. My friends and family were there for me, in their own ways. Calls, visits, words of encouragement. But the one person I needed the most, Michael, was a ghost, a part of my life that seemed to have vanished completely. I learned to navigate the world in my wheelchair, to adapt to my new reality. It was a slow, painful process, but I was making progress, finding a new kind of strength within myself. The day Michael came back, it wasn't for the reasons I'd hoped. He stood at the door, a folder in his hand that I knew all too well, divorce papers. My heart sank. But as he saw me in the wheelchair, his expression changed from determined to shocked. "Zoe, I didn't realize it was this bad," he stammered, the papers forgotten for a moment. "Yeah, well, it's been tough," I replied, trying to mask the mix of emotions his presence brought up. He hesitated, then took a step inside. "I came to talk about the divorce, but this can wait. It's not important right now." I was surprised by his reaction. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell him he couldn't just waltz back into my life. But another part, a quieter, more hopeful part, was relieved. From that day, Michael started dropping by. At first, it was awkward, the air heavy with all the things left unsaid. But gradually, we started talking, really talking, for the first time in months. One afternoon, he found me in the living room, surrounded by my paintings. He picked one up, a swirl of blues and greens. "These are really good, Zoe. I didn't know you still painted." I shrugged, feeling a flush of pride. I needed something to do. Helps me forget, even if it's just for a little while. We sat down, and for the first time in a long time, we laughed. It was like a window had opened, letting in the fresh air of our old camaraderie. We talked about everything and nothing, work, friends, a new movie that was out. As the days turned into weeks, Michael's visits became the highlight of my days. We'd talk, laugh, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. It was a tentative dance, a slow rebuilding of trust and affection. And with each visit, I felt something shift inside me. The walls I'd built around my heart started to crumble, brick by brick. It was scary, letting him in again, but it also felt right. So we continued, taking each day as it came, each shared laugh and conversation a step towards something new. It wasn't the life we'd planned, but it was a life we were building together, one day at a time. Just when life seemed to be taking a turn for the better, with Michael and I slowly finding our way back to each other, Mrs. Henderson, Michael's mother, decided to insert herself into our lives in the most intrusive way possible. She announced that she was moving in with us, under the guise of wanting to help with my recovery. I was immediately wary, but Michael seemed to think it was a good idea. "Zoe, she just wants to help," Michael tried to reassure me when we first discussed it. "It might be good to have an extra pair of hands around the house." I wasn't convinced. "Michael, you know how your mom is. She's never really liked me." He gave me a hopeful look. "Maybe this will be a chance for you two to bond. She really seems to want to make amends." Reluctantly, I agreed. But it didn't take long for Mrs. Henderson's true colors to show. Whenever Michael was around, she was sweetness personified, always ready with a helpful suggestion or a kind word. But as soon as he left the room, her demeanor changed. It was like dealing with two different people. One afternoon, while Michael was at the store, she came into the living room where I was trying to read. "You know, Zoe, Michael is just staying with you out of pity," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "No man wants a wife who can't even take care of herself." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "I think that's for Michael to decide, Mrs. Henderson." She tooted, shaking her head. "I'm just being realistic, dear. It's only a matter of time before he realizes he can do better." Her words were like a knife to my heart, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. "If you're done, I'd like to get back to my book." She huffed and left the room, but her words stayed with me, festering like a wound. I wanted to tell Michael, to let him know what his mother was really like, but I was afraid. Afraid that it would drive a wedge between us again, that he might not believe me, or worse, that he might side with her. So, I kept it to myself, bearing her barbs in silence. It was a lonely, painful experience. Every cutting remark, every snide comment, I absorbed and locked away, a growing weight on my soul. In the evenings, when Michael asked how my day was, I would force a smile and lie. "It was fine. Your mom's been a big help." And he would smile back, relieved that things were going well. But inside, I was screaming, desperate for someone to see the truth, to understand the pain I was enduring. It was a restless night, and sleep seemed to elude me. The house was silent except for the occasional creaks and groans that come with an old building. Then, a murmur of voices from downstairs pierced the quiet. Curiosity piqued, I wheeled myself to the top of the stairs, straining to hear the conversation below. It was Mrs. Henderson and Michael, her voice a sharp whisper that sliced through the stillness of the night. "Michael, look at these pictures. This girl, Laura, she's a teacher, beautiful and healthy. And this one, Sarah, she comes from a good family. You need to think about your future, about having a family." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Was she seriously showing Michael photos of other women? Michael's voice was a low rumble. Mom, stop this. I'm not interested. I love Zoe. Love? My heart fluttered at his words, but Mrs. Henderson's next words froze it again. But she's a cripple, Michael. She can't give you what you need, Mrs. Henderson hissed. I clutched the railing, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Her words stung like acid. Michael's voice rose, tinged with anger. That's enough, Mom. I don't want to hear another word. I love Zoe, and I'm staying with her. This is my decision. There was a pause, and then Mrs. Henderson's voice, now shrill with rage. You're wasting your life with her. She's nothing but a burden. It would be better if she just... I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Tears blurred my vision, and a sob caught in my throat. That's it, Mom. Get out of my house. Now. Michael's voice was like thunder, a sound I had never heard from him before. The sound of footsteps and a door slamming jolted me back to reality. I wheeled back to my room as quickly as I could, my mind racing, my heart in turmoil. A few minutes later, Michael came into the room. He looked distraught, his eyes searching mine. Zoe, I'm so sorry. Did you hear all that? He asked, his voice breaking. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He moved closer, kneeling beside me, his hands reaching for mine. I never wanted you to hear those things. My mom's gone. I asked her to leave. I want you to know that I meant what I said. I love you, Zoe, and I'm not leaving you. His words were a small comfort against the backdrop of his mother's cruelty. But in that moment, with Michael holding me, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could get past this, maybe our love was strong enough to withstand even the harshest of storms. The days after Mrs. Henderson was asked to leave brought a sense of calm to our home that I hadn't felt in a long time. Michael and I were finding our rhythm again, slowly piecing together the fragments of our relationship. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, breaking the tranquility. The caller ID showed Mrs. Henderson's number. With a deep breath, I answered, "Hello?" "Zoe, it's me," came Mrs. Henderson's voice, laced with a tone of distress I wasn't used to hearing from her. "Michael, he's cut me off. After everything I've done, he won't even help me financially." Her words stirred a mix of emotions within me. "Mrs. Henderson, what happened between you and Michael was bound to have consequences. You said some unforgivable things." There was a pause, and then a sob from her end. "But I'm his mother. How could he do this to me?" "Maybe it's time you reflected on your actions, Mrs. Henderson. You pushed him away with your words and actions," I said, my voice steady despite the churn of emotions inside. "But I need his help, Zoe. I have nowhere else to turn." I sighed, feeling a pang of pity but standing firm. "You brought this on yourself, Mrs. Henderson. Michael needs to do what's best for him, for us. Maybe this is a wake-up call for you to start making some changes." The call ended with her in tears, but I knew I had spoken the truth. It was a difficult conversation, but necessary. Turning to Michael, who had been listening quietly, I saw a mix of emotions on his face. "Are you okay?" I asked. He nodded, wrapping me in a gentle embrace. "I am now. It's hard, but I think it's for the best. We need to focus on us, on our future." Our future. The word filled me with hope. We had weathered the storm together, and now it was time to rebuild. "We have a lot to look forward to, Michael. Just the two of us," I said, smiling up at him. He returned the smile, his eyes bright with the promise of a new beginning. "Yes, we do. I love you, Zoe, more than ever." As days turned into weeks, our home became a sanctuary of love and understanding. We talked about our dreams, about starting a family, about moving forward together. The challenges we had faced only made our bond stronger, our resolve firmer. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from our porch, Michael took my hand. "This feels right, doesn't it? Just us, moving forward together. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his presence. It does. We've come through so much, and now we have a whole future to look forward to. Just us. In that moment, I realized how far we had come. From the depths of despair and loneliness, we had risen together, stronger and more united. Our journey wasn't easy, but it had brought us to a place of understanding and profound love. My name's Rita, and if you told me my life would turn into a whirlwind drama, I'd have laughed. I'm 35, a journalist, and not the kind who sits around. I'm always on the go, chasing stories, making headlines. I've got a daughter, Emily, she's the light of my life. 8 years old and already the boss of our small apartment in the city. Life was ticking along until 2 years ago. I was covering a story on the city's new recycling initiative. Sounds boring, right? But then I met David. He was the mayor's right-hand man, and let me tell you, he had this air about him. Smart, quick on his feet, and knew how to hold a conversation. 12 years my senior, but who's counting? We hit it off right away. It started with casual chats after the interview sessions. You're doing great work, he'd say. This city needs more journalists like you. Flattery? Maybe, but it worked. David and I, we didn't waste time. Got married a year after meeting. He's got a daughter too, Sarah. She's 20, off at college in another city. Can't say we're close. She's got this cold vibe, especially towards Emily. I remember the first time they met. Hi Sarah, this is Emily, I'd said, trying to sound upbeat. Sarah had looked at her, not mean, but not warm either. Hi, she'd muttered, then turned away, lost in her phone. Emily tugged at my shirt. Mom, does she not like me? I brushed her hair back. Don't worry about it, honey. She's just different. David was a lifesaver, though. My job, it's crazy hours, you know? He started picking up Emily from school, making her lunch. He was good at it, and Emily seemed to like him. David's funny, Mom, she'd say. He makes the best sandwiches. Our apartment, it's cozy. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room that's seen better days. But it's home. Emily's room is a burst of pink and posters of pop stars I can't name. David moved in some of his stuff too, mostly books and a few old records. He's into jazz, which is fine, but not my cup of tea. Rita, you should try listening to this, he'd say, putting on some old record. It's classic. I'd smile, nodding along. Sure, I'll give it a shot. But between you and me, I never did. We settled into this routine, the 3 of us. It was nice, normal. Or so I thought. But like they say, normal's just what you're used to, until it's not. Things started to shift, but it wasn't like I woke up one day and everything was different. It was slow, like a faucet dripping until the sink's full. Emily, she's always been this bundle of energy, you know? Always running around, laughing, her eyes sparkling with all kinds of mischief. But then, it was like someone turned down her brightness. She became quieter, more like she was walking on eggshells. One night, I was tucking her into bed, and she was just lying there, staring at the ceiling. I brushed her hair, trying to make her laugh. Hey, space cadet, you planning a trip to the moon? She didn't even crack a smile. Just whispered, no, Mom. That was my cue. What's up? You're not your usual self. She turned her head, not meeting my eyes. I'm okay. I sat down next to her. You sure? You've been kinda quiet lately. She shrugged. Just tired, I guess. Tired? At 8? I wasn't buying it. But I let it slide, didn't want to push her. Okay, kiddo. If you say so. But you know you can tell me anything, right? She nodded, but there was something off. I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. Good night, love. As I closed the door, I heard her whisper, "Night, Mom." I went to the kitchen where David was. He was doing his usual, flipping through some papers, probably work stuff. "Hey," I said. "You notice anything off with Emily lately?" He didn't look up. "Off? Like what?" "Like she's not herself. More quiet, kinda down." He shrugged, still not looking at me. "Kids have moods, Rita. She's probably fine." "Yeah, maybe." I wasn't convinced, but what else could I say? The next few days, it was the same. Emily was like a little shadow, just there but not really. It got me thinking, maybe something at school? I decided to ask her about it. I waited for a good time, right after dinner when we were clearing up. "Hey, Em, everything okay, at school?" She was stacking plates, not looking at me. "Yeah, it's okay." "You sure? No one's bothering you or anything?" She paused, then shook her head. "No, everyone's nice." I wanted to believe her, but moms know, right? There's this gut feeling when something's not right. I let it go for the moment, didn't want to push her. That weekend, we were doing laundry. Emily was helping me fold clothes. That's when I saw it. A bruise on her arm. Not a small one either. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Em, what's that on your arm?" She pulled her sleeve down quick. "Oh, I fell at the playground." "You fell? That looks bad, honey." She avoided my eyes. "It's nothing, really." I wanted to dig deeper, but her face, it was like she was scared. Scared of what? I couldn't figure it out. "Okay, if you say so. But be careful, okay?" "Yeah, Mom." I watched her for a moment. She went back to folding, like nothing happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was up, and I needed to find out what. It was eating at me, like a splinter you can't get out. Something was off with Emily, and I couldn't just let it go. That bruise, her quietness, it wasn't like her. I had to figure it out, but I didn't know where to start. Then, this idea hit me. Why not use one of those smartwatches? The ones that can record stuff. I mean, if something's happening at school, maybe I could catch it. I got the watch, a sleek little thing. Told Emily it was an early birthday present. "Look at this, Em. You can call me with it if you ever need to," I said, trying to sound upbeat. She looked at it, a bit puzzled but then smiled. "Thanks, Mom. It's cool." I showed her how to use it, but I didn't tell her about the recording part. Felt kind of sneaky, but I had to know. The next few days, I was anxious, waiting for something, anything. Finally, when she was in bed, I took the watch to check the recordings. My heart was racing as I started listening. At first, it was just kid stuff. Her talking to friends, teachers in the background, normal school noises. But then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was David's voice, but not the David I knew. He was angry, really angry. "You think you can just mess around, huh? You're such a fool, Emily." I couldn't believe it. This wasn't the David who made sandwiches and joked around. My hands were shaking as I listened. There was a sound, like a slap, and then Emily crying. "Please, stop. I won't do it again." I felt sick. My David, hitting my little girl? I had to stop the recording. My mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. But it was, right there in the recording. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, thinking, trying to make sense of it. In the morning, I saw Emily off to school, acting like everything was normal. But as soon as she left, I called in sick to work. I had to figure this out. David came home that evening, all smiles like usual. "Hey, how was your day?" he asked, hanging up his coat. I was boiling inside, but I kept my cool. "Oh, you know, the usual. Emily's got a school project coming up. She's pretty excited. He just nodded. That's good. Kids need stuff to keep them busy. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he did it. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed to be sure, needed more proof. The next few days, I kept a close eye on Emily, on David. Everything seemed normal, but I knew it wasn't. I kept checking the watch, but there was nothing like before. Just once was enough though. Once was too much. I was in a daze, thinking about that recording. It kept replaying in my head, over and over. David's voice, Emily's cries. I needed to do something, but what? I couldn't just confront David, not without a plan. And Emily, I needed to talk to her, get her side. That evening, I sat Emily down. We were in her room, surrounded by her toys and drawings. Honey, we need to talk about something important, I started, trying to sound calm. She looked up, her eyes wide. Is everything okay, Mom? I took a deep breath. It's about David. Has he ever hurt you? Her eyes darted away. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. What do you mean? Emily, I need you to be honest with me. Has David ever hit you? There was a long pause. Then, she nodded, slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me, baby? He said not to. He said you'd be mad at me. She was crying now. I pulled her into my arms. Oh, I'm so sorry. This is not your fault, okay? You did nothing wrong. We sat there for a while, just holding each other. My mind was racing. I had to protect her, get her away from David. The next day, I made a plan. I'd collect more evidence, something solid. Then, I'd go to the police. But first, I needed to keep Emily safe. I called my mom. Mom, I need a favor. Can Emily stay with you for a few days? I've got a big project at work. Of course, dear. Is everything all right? Yeah, just busy. Thanks, Mom. That was one problem solved. But now, the hard part. Gathering evidence against David. I didn't know how to do it, but I had to try. I started by talking to Sarah, David's daughter. Maybe she knew something, could help somehow. I called her, my heart pounding. Sarah, it's Rita. We need to talk. It's about your dad. There was silence on the line. Then, what about him? I think he's been hurting Emily. I have a recording, but I need more. Did he ever hurt you? Another long silence. Then, a quiet, yes. It was like a floodgate opened. Sarah told me everything. How David had been abusive to her, how she was scared of him. I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. Getting more evidence against David wasn't going to be a walk in the park. I knew that. The guy was slick, always had his guard up. But what he didn't know was that I was onto him, and I was not about to let him get away with hurting my daughter. First things first, I needed to keep it cool around him, act like nothing was up. Morning, David, I said over breakfast, keeping my voice light. He grunted something back, buried in his newspaper. You got plans today? He asked, not even looking up. Just the usual work stuff, I replied, stirring my coffee. Meeting with the mayor. You know how it is. Oh, I knew how it was all right. Meetings and schmoozing, that was David's game. But my game had just begun. I dropped Emily off at my mom's place. You'll be fine here, sweetheart, I told her, trying to sound cheerful. Grandma's got that new puzzle for you. Emily smiled, a bit. I like puzzles, she said, hugging me tight. Me too, baby. Me too, I whispered, kissing her forehead. Once I was sure Emily was safe, it was time to get to work. I called Sarah. We need to meet. It's time we put a plan together. She agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. It was quiet, the kind of place where you could talk without being overheard. Sarah looked tense when I got there. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice low. "We need to record him, get him on tape admitting what he's done. To you, to Emily. It's the only way." Sarah nodded, biting her lip. "I can try talking to him. Maybe get him to say something." It was risky, but it was all we had. "Be careful, Sarah. He can't know we're on to him." "I know. I'll be careful." We spent the next hour going over every detail. What to say, how to say it, when to push, when to back off. It was like setting a trap, and we had to be perfect. The next few days were a blur. I kept my distance from David, made excuses to stay late at work, anything to avoid being alone with him. Sarah did her part. She called David, made up some story about needing to talk. "Dad, I've been thinking about when I was a kid," she said on the phone. I could hear her voice, tense but steady. "There are things we never really talked about." David took the bait. "We can talk, sure. Come over for dinner." That was it. Sarah was going in, wired to record everything. My heart was in my throat the whole evening, waiting for her call. It came late that night. "I got it, Rita. I got him to talk." I felt a mix of relief and dread. "Good work, Sarah. Bring it over. We need to listen to it, make sure we have what we need." She came over, looking like she'd just gone 10 rounds in the ring. We sat at my kitchen table, listening to the recording. David's voice filled the room, calm at first, then getting angrier. "You always were a difficult child, Sarah. Always asking for it." My blood boiled listening to him. But then, he said it, clear as day. "I did what I had to do. To you, to Emily. You both needed to learn." That was it. The confession. I felt sick to my stomach, but at the same time, I felt a surge of triumph. We had him. "We take this to the police, first thing tomorrow," I said, my voice firm. Sarah nodded, looking exhausted but determined. "Yeah, it's time he paid for what he's done." It was a long night. Neither of us slept much. But we had what we needed. David was going down, and I was going to make sure of it. The morning sun was barely up, but I was already wide awake, my mind racing. Today was the day I'd confront David. The evidence was there, on my kitchen table, a little recorder that held his confession. My hands were shaking as I thought about what I had to do. I couldn't back down now. I heard David getting ready, the usual clatter in the bathroom, the sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor. I braced myself as he came into the kitchen. "Morning, Rita," he said, grabbing his coffee. He sounded so normal, like it was just another day. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk, David." He raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk on his face. "About what?" "About what you've done. To Emily. To Sarah." His face changed then, the smirk disappearing. "What are you talking about?" I felt a surge of anger. "I know everything, David. It's over. I know you hurt Emily. I know you hurt your own daughter." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You think that will hold up? You think anyone will believe you over me?" I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. "They will when they hear this." I hit play on the recorder, and his voice filled the room, admitting what he'd done. David's face went pale. He reached for the recorder, but I snatched it away. "No, you don't get to hide from this. Not anymore." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're going to ruin everything. My career, my life. You did that yourself when you hurt those girls. It's over, David." He looked desperate, cornered. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, it's your word against yours. You confessed, David. It's all here. He was silent then, just staring at me, his face a mask of defeat. I'm going to the police, I said, my voice steady. And I'm taking this with me. You're going to pay for what you've done. He didn't say anything as I walked past him, out of the kitchen. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed. Walking into the police station, my heart was hammering in my chest like a drum. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this, but here I was, about to turn in the man I once thought I loved. The officer at the desk looked up as I approached. Can I help you, ma'am? I took a deep breath. Yes, I need to report a case of domestic abuse. I have evidence. My voice was shaking, but I held the recorder tightly in my hand like a lifeline. He looked at me, his expression turning serious. All right, let's go to an interview room and you can tell me everything. The next hours were a blur of questions and statements. I played them the recording, watched their faces change as David's voice filled the room. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. When I finally left the police station, I felt empty and exhausted, but there was a sense of relief too. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. I called Sarah. It's done. I gave them the recording. There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, firm but emotional. Thank you, Rita. For everything. We're in this together, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. David was arrested, and the story hit the news. Headlines screamed about the mayor's assistant and the shocking allegations against him. My world was upside down, but I knew I'd done the right thing. The legal battle was tough. David had a good lawyer, the kind that knows how to twist words and play on technicalities. But we had the truth on our side. Sarah testified, her voice breaking as she told the court about her father's abuse. I could see the jury's faces, the horror and sympathy as they listened to her story. Then it was my turn. Ms. Stevens, can you tell the court about the recording you made? The prosecutor asked. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I recorded Mr. Johnson admitting to abusing my daughter and his own daughter. I wanted to protect my child and expose the truth. David's lawyer tried to shake me, questioning my motives, suggesting I was out for revenge. But I stood my ground. This isn't about revenge. It's about protecting my daughter and getting justice for what he did. The trial seemed to drag on forever, but finally, the day of the verdict came. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap, waiting for the jury to return. We find the defendant, David Johnson, guilty of child abuse, the foreman said, and it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. David was sentenced to prison and colossal monetary compensation. The judge's words were harsh, condemning his actions and the pain he'd caused. As he was led away, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger. But above all, I felt a sense of closure. The aftermath was hard. I had to rebuild my life, help Emily heal from the trauma she'd experienced. But we were free from David's shadow, and that was what mattered. I focused on my work, on being there for Emily. We started therapy, both of us, to work through everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, but we were getting there, day by day. We moved into a new house. It was smaller than the old one, but it was ours, and it was a fresh start. The first day we moved in, Emily ran around the house, exploring every nook and cranny. I get to pick my room, she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Of course, kiddo. Whichever one you want, I replied, watching her dash from room to room. She picked the one with the big window that looked out over the backyard. I can see the stars from here, Mom. I smiled. Then it's perfect for you. Unpacking was a chore, but it felt good, like we were putting our lives back together, piece by piece. We decided to paint the living room together. I gave Emily a paintbrush. What do you think? Blue or green? She dipped the brush in the blue paint. Blue, like the sky on a sunny day. So blue it is, I said, and we got to work, turning the room into our own little piece of the sky. One afternoon, while we were taking a break from painting, there was a knock on the door. It was Sarah. She stood there, a bit awkward, shifting from foot to foot. Hey, Rita, can I come in? I was surprised but happy to see her. Of course, come in. We sat in the half-painted living room, on boxes that served as chairs. I wanted to say thank you, Sarah said, looking down at her hands. For everything you did. For me, for Emily. I reached out and took her hand. We're family, Sarah. That's what families do. She smiled, a small, tentative smile. I brought something. For Emily. She handed Emily a small, wrapped package. Emily looked at the package. Is that for me? Sarah nodded. Yeah, I thought you might like it. Emily tore open the package. Inside was a book about stars and planets. Her face lit up. Wow, thank you, Sarah. Sarah looked relieved, happy. You're welcome. Things were still tough, but moments like that made it all worth it. We were building something new, something strong. Emily went back to school, and she was doing well, making friends, coming back to her old self. And me, I went back to work, throwing myself into stories, into uncovering truths, just like I always did. But now, I had a new perspective, a new understanding of the struggles people faced. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had our little world, our safe haven, and we had each other. And that was more than enough. It was a new beginning, a chance to heal, to grow, to love. And we were ready for it, ready for whatever came our way. Together, we were unstoppable. I remember the day everything began to change. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other, except it wasn't. I was in the kitchen, trying to get breakfast ready for Alex, our 4-year-old, who was energetically running around. Mark was in the dining room, already buried in his phone, probably checking emails from work. I met Mark at his family's company. I started in the marketing department, he was in finance. We hit it off at a company picnic. 2 years later, we were married. I thought it was love. But after the wedding, things changed. Mark and his family insisted I become a housewife. It's for the best, they said. I didn't realize then that it was the beginning of losing myself. Mommy, I want pancakes. Alex's voice cut through my thoughts. Coming right up, honey, I replied, flipping a pancake on the skillet. Mark's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the morning air. Karen, are you going to take all day? I have an important meeting. Sorry, just finishing up here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The clatter of plates as I set them on the table seemed louder than usual. Mark barely glanced at the breakfast. This bacon is undercooked, he muttered, pushing the plate away. I felt a sting in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I'll make a note of it for next time, I said, plastering a smile on my face. Alex, oblivious to the tension, chattered away about his toy cars. I envied his innocence. Mark's mother, Helen, chose that moment to make her grand entrance, as if on cue. Karen, darling, let me show you how to cook bacon properly. Mark likes it crispy. I watched as she took over my kitchen, my home, my life. Helen had always been the matriarch, overseeing everything with a critical eye. And there I was, her project. See, you have to let it cook on low heat for longer. You'd know if you paid more attention, Helen said, flipping the bacon with an air of superiority. Mark nodded in agreement, not meeting my eyes. Mom knows best, he said. I bit back a retort, focusing on Alex's bright smile as he munched on his pancakes. As they left the kitchen, Helen with a satisfied smile and Mark still glued to his phone, I stood there, amidst the sizzling pans and the half-eaten breakfast, feeling more alone than ever. As days turned into weeks, the distance between Mark and me grew. It was like living with a stranger. He came home late, left early, and we barely spoke. I tried to bridge the gap, but it was like talking to a wall. One evening, I decided to make his favorite, spaghetti bolognese. I spent hours in the kitchen, hoping it would bring back a spark, anything. I set the table, lit candles, even put on some music, the kind we used to dance to. When Mark finally came home, he didn't even notice the effort. He just slumped into his chair, eyes fixed on his phone. "What's this?" he asked, poking at the spaghetti. "I thought I'd make your favorite," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a bite and grimaced. "It's too salty. Didn't you taste it?" I felt a lump in my throat. I thought it was okay." He pushed the plate away. "I'm not eating this. I'll order a pizza." My heart sank as I cleared the untouched food. It felt like I was throwing away more than just spaghetti. Alex, bless his soul, tried to lighten the mood. "Mommy, can I have pizza too?" "Of course, sweetie." I managed to smile for him. But the silence that followed was deafening. Mark ate his pizza, eyes glued to the TV, while I picked at my food. The gap between us felt like a chasm. The next day was no different. I was folding laundry when Mark walked in, his face like a thundercloud. "Can't you do something about all this mess?" he snapped, kicking at a toy car Alex had left on the floor. "I try to keep up, but with Alex, it's a bit challenging," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "Well, try harder. It's not rocket science to keep a house clean," he retorted, not even looking at me. I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'm doing my best, Mark." "Your best isn't good enough," he muttered, storming off to his office, the spare room he'd taken over. It was like this every day. The man I married, who used to make me laugh, who used to listen, was gone. In his place was this cold, indifferent person I barely recognized. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to Mark's even breathing, I realized how alone I felt. The man lying next to me might as well have been a million miles away. I missed the warmth, the love, the connection we once had. But most of all, I missed the man I thought I married. And in the darkness, a thought crept into my mind, maybe this was the beginning of the end. Things took a sharp turn when Mark got promoted to head of the family company. It was as if that title flipped a switch in him. He started coming home even later, sometimes not at all. When he was home, it was like living with a king who thought his castle wasn't good enough. One evening, he swaggered in, reeking of expensive cologne and self-importance. "Karen, we need to talk about your appearance," he said, eyeing me like I was a piece of outdated furniture. I was taken aback. "My appearance? What about it?" He sighed, like he was explaining something to a child. "You've let yourself go. It's embarrassing. I'm the head of a major company now. I can't have you looking like this." I felt my cheeks burn. "I'm taking care of Alex and the house. I don't exactly have time for a beauty routine." He rolled his eyes. "Excuses. If you cared enough, you'd find the time. Get a gym membership. Do something." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, it's all about appearances for you now? What happened to loving me for who I am?" He scoffed. That was before I realized I could do better. Shape up, Karen. Or I might have to make some changes. I was speechless. The man I'd loved, the father of my child, was telling me I wasn't good enough for him anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and he was the water. The next day, I tried to talk to him about it, hoping he'd been in a bad mood and didn't mean it. He was in the kitchen, sipping his expensive coffee, scrolling through his phone. "Mark, about last night, I think we need to talk," I started, my hands trembling. He didn't look up. "Not now, Karen. I have a meeting." "But this is important. You hurt me," I insisted. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. I said what needed to be said. You're the one who needs to change, not me. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. You used to love me the way I was. He snorted. That was before I realized my worth. You should too. I walked away, feeling a piece of my heart break off. The man I'd married was gone. In his place was this stranger who judged me, who made me feel small and worthless. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the silence of the house, I realized I had a choice to make. I could stay and wither away under his contempt, or I could leave and try to find myself again. It was a terrifying thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could be strong enough to start again. It was at one of those overly formal family dinners that I felt the full weight of being disregarded. The dinner table was set like something out of a magazine, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. Mark and his father, John, were absorbed in discussing the family business. I sat there, a silent observer, my presence seemingly forgotten. The quarterly reports need serious attention. Sales must pick up, John stated, his voice firm and businesslike. Mark was quick to respond, we're considering expanding our marketing, maybe even breaking into new international markets. Hearing this, I couldn't help but speak up. Marketing was my turf, my passion before I was reduced to just a housewife. Have you thought about leveraging digital marketing? Social media platforms could be a great way to widen your reach, I suggested, a bit hesitantly. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, to my dismay, John burst into laughter. Social media? Really, Karen? It's endearing that you want to help, but let's leave the business talk to us, shall we? Mark joined in with a patronizing chuckle. Keep to what you're good at, Karen. Let us handle the business. I felt a flush of embarrassment and anger. I have a background in marketing. My suggestions are valid, I retorted, a little more sharply. John dismissed me with a wave of his hand. That was years ago, dear. You're out of touch. You have other responsibilities now. The rest of the dinner went by in a blur of humiliation and anger. Their words stung, belittling not just my ideas but my very identity. I was more than just their perception of me. Later, needing some solace and support, I went to see my dad. He had always been my pillar of strength, the one who always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. Dad, they just brushed me off, like I don't matter, I said, my voice tinged with frustration and hurt. Karen, I've always told you about Mark and his family's nature, Dad replied, his tone a mix of concern and a hint of, I told you so. I know, Dad, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. They treat me as if I'm invisible, I admitted, feeling defeated. Karen, you're not invisible. You're smart and capable. Don't let them diminish you, he encouraged, his voice firm. But I feel trapped, Dad. I don't know what to do, I confessed, feeling a sense of despair. That's when Dad surprised me. What if we shake things up a bit? I've got some money set aside from some successful investments. How about I buy shares in Mark's family company? I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. You're joking, right? No, I'm serious. It's high time someone showed them you're not to be underestimated. I laughed, despite the situation. The thought of my dad, the outsider, getting involved in their precious family business was absurd, yet strangely satisfying. Life, as I knew it, came crashing down one ordinary Tuesday. I had been feeling under the weather for a while, but I brushed it off as stress or fatigue. It wasn't until I found a lump that I couldn't ignore it anymore. The doctor's appointment was supposed to be routine, but it wasn't. Sitting in the sterile doctor's office, the words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm sorry, Karen, but it's breast cancer. We caught it early, but you'll need immediate treatment. I sat there, numb. Cancer? Me? It couldn't be. But the doctor's solemn face told me it was all too real. I have a son. A family. What are my options? My voice sounded distant, even to my ears. We'll discuss treatment plans, but it's important we start soon, the doctor said gently. I walked home in a daze. How do I tell Mark? How do I tell Alex? My mind was a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Mark was in the living room when I got home, glued to his laptop as usual. Mark, we need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up, annoyed. What now, Karen? Can't you see I'm busy? I took a deep breath. It's serious. I went to the doctor today. I have breast cancer. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said something I'll never forget. Cancer? Great. Just what I needed. More drama. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. Mark, did you hear what I said? I have cancer. He sighed, closing his laptop with a snap. Yeah, I heard you. So, what does this mean? More doctor visits? How is this going to affect me and the company? I was speechless. How could he be so callous? It means I need treatment, Mark. I need support. He stood up, pacing the room. Well, you better get it sorted quickly. I can't have you slacking off on housework and taking care of Alex. I felt like I was in some nightmare. Is that all you care about? The house? The work? What about me? He stopped, looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Look, Karen, it's not that I don't care, but you have to understand the timing is terrible. We have a business to run. The rest of the conversation was a blur. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I was alone, truly alone in this. The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments, treatments, and overwhelming fatigue. I tried to keep up with the house and Alex, but it was too much. Mark's patience wore thin. One evening, after a particularly grueling treatment, I was too exhausted to cook. Mark, can we order in tonight? I'm just not up to it. He scoffed, order in? Again? What do I keep you around for if you can't even cook a simple meal? It was a crushing blow, not just to my body, but to my heart. The day of my surgery loomed over me like a dark cloud. I was scared, not just of the surgery itself, but of what life would be like after. I would wake up less of a woman, or so I felt. My body, once a source of pride, was now a traitor. I didn't expect Mark to hold my hand and tell me everything would be okay, those days were long gone, but I did hope for a semblance of support. Instead, what I got was indifference. As I was getting ready for the hospital, Mark was busy getting dressed for work. You'll be fine, right? The doctors know what they're doing, he said, not even looking at me. Yeah, I guess, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He paused, his hand on the door handle. Call me when it's done. I've got an important meeting, can't miss it. I felt a lump form in my throat. Sure, I'll call. The surgery was a blur, but waking up was worse. I felt a void where part of me used to be. My parents were there when I opened my eyes, their faces etched with concern and love. Mom, Dad, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. We're here, sweetheart. We're here, Mom said, taking my hand. Mark didn't show up, not that day or the next. He didn't even call. It was as if my surgery, my cancer, was a minor inconvenience best kept out of sight, out of mind. Recovery was slow and painful, but eventually, I was allowed to go home. I dreaded it, not knowing what to expect from Mark. I arrived home to a shock. Mark wasn't alone. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, was in my living room. She was laughing at something he said, touching his arm in a familiar way. I felt like I had walked into someone else's life. Mark? What's going on? My voice was a croak, still weak from the surgery. He looked up, surprised, then his expression hardened. Karen, let's talk in the kitchen. In the kitchen, he was blunt, cold. I want a divorce. I've met someone else. You're not the woman I married. I stood there, numb, the pain from my surgery nothing compared to the pain in my chest. Divorce? Because of her? Because of this? I touched the bandage on my chest, my voice rising. It's not just that. You've changed. You're always so sad, so needy. I need someone vibrant, alive. Not this. He gestured at me dismissively. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I have cancer, Mark. I had surgery. What did you expect? He shrugged. I don't know. But this isn't it. I've moved on. You should too. He handed me divorce papers, still warm from the printer. I want you out of the house. It's for the best. I looked at him, at the stranger he had become. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem. Figure it out. I packed a bag, my hands shaking. Alex was at my parents', thankfully spared from this nightmare. As I left, I looked back at the house, the life, the man I had once loved. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, harsh reality. After the divorce, I moved in with my parents, a shadow of my former self. The betrayal, the surgery, the cancer, it all took its toll. But it was in those moments of despair that something unexpected happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, nursing a cup of coffee, the silence between us comfortable. Dad broke it with a question that caught me off guard. Karen, remember when I said I was thinking of buying shares in Mark's company? I looked up, surprised. Yeah, I thought you were joking. He shook his head, a serious look in his eyes. I wasn't. I went through with it. I now own a significant portion of the company. I nearly dropped my cup. You what? He nodded, yep. I used my investment savings. It's all legal and above board. I own 80% of the shares now. I was speechless. This was huge. Dad owning a majority of Mark's family company? It was the kind of twist you'd expect in a movie, not real life. But why, Dad? I managed to ask, still reeling from the shock. He took a sip of his coffee before answering. Because no one messes with my daughter. Plus, it was a good investment opportunity. It's a solid company, despite Mark. A part of me was overwhelmed by his gesture, but another part, a part one thought was long buried, felt a spark. Revenge wasn't my style, but justice? That was a different story. Dad, what are you planning to do with those shares? I asked, curiosity piquing. He grinned. Well, that's up to you, Karen. You have the business acumen, the marketing knowledge. You could do a lot with this opportunity. Me? Running the company that once belonged to Mark and his family? It was ludicrous, audacious, and thrilling. But I'm not sure I'm up for it. I hesitated, doubt creeping in. Dad put his hand on mine, his eyes kind. You're stronger than you think, Karen. You've been through hell and back. This could be your chance to rise from the ashes, to show them who Karen really is. The idea was crazy, but it was also empowering. For years, I'd been put down, made to feel small and insignificant. But now, I had the power to change that, to turn the tables. I spent the next few days thinking about it, weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking control of my life, about proving to myself that I was more than what Mark and his family thought of me. Finally, I made my decision. I was going to do it. I was going to take on the company, make it my own. It was a daunting thought, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose, a drive. Dad, I'll do it. I'll take over the company, I said, my voice steady and confident. Dad smiled, his eyes twinkling. I knew you would. I'll set up a meeting with the board. It's time they met the new majority shareholder. The day of the shareholders' meeting dawned, a day that would mark my foray into a world I had been shut out from for so long. I stood outside the company building, taking a deep breath. Inside, the board, along with Mark and his father, awaited the arrival of the new majority shareholder. They were in for a surprise. Dressed in my best suit, feeling more confident than I had in years, I pushed open the doors and walked into the boardroom. The looks on their faces were priceless. "Karen, what are you doing here?" Mark stammered, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling every pair of eyes on me. "I'm the new majority shareholder. Thanks to my father's investment, I now own 80% of this company." There was a moment of stunned silence, then whispers broke out among the board members. John, Mark's father, was the first to recover. "This has to be some kind of joke," he said, his voice gruff. "No joke, John. I'm here to make some changes," I replied, my voice steady. Mark was still staring at me, his face pale. "Karen, this is crazy. You can't run a company." I smiled, a small, satisfied curve of my lips. "I think you'll find I'm more than capable. In fact, I have plans to increase profits and expand the company. Plans that involve modernizing our approach and embracing digital marketing, something I suggested before and was laughed at." The board members were now listening intently. I laid out my plans, speaking with confidence and knowledge. I saw nods of approval, even a few impressed glances. As the meeting drew to a close, Mark approached me, a desperate look in his eyes. "Karen, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out." I looked at him, the man who had belittled me, betrayed me, and thrown me away when I was at my lowest. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You made your choice. Now, I've made mine." He reached out, but I stepped back. "Karen, I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, give me a chance." I shook my head, my resolve firm. "It's too late for that, Mark. You showed me your true colors, and I've moved on." Leaving the boardroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had come a long way from the broken woman who left Mark's house with a bag and a broken heart. I had taken control of my life, my future. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. I took a moment to savor it, the beauty of a new beginning. "Here's to new beginnings," I whispered to myself, a smile playing on my lips. I'm Sarah, just your average 26-year-old working as a manager in a trading company. You wouldn't pick me out in a crowd, short hair, simple style, more into spreadsheets than fashion spreads. That day, sitting in the corner of my favorite cafe with a black coffee and my laptop, I didn't expect anything unusual. Just another day. But life had other plans. The cafe was buzzing with the usual mix of people, some buried in their laptops, others chatting away. Then there was this couple at the next table, catching everyone's attention. The girl, Tina, was in full meltdown mode. "Jake, you're unbelievable. How could you even think of doing that?" She was practically shouting. Jake, a regular-looking guy in a button-up shirt, seemed cornered. "Tina, please, let's not do this here. You're misunderstanding the whole thing," he replied, his voice a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "Oh, am I? Am I really, Jake? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just a two-faced jerk." Tina was not holding back. People around started to take notice. Some shot sympathetic glances at Jake, others just enjoyed the drama. "I'm not two-faced. You're just overreacting like you always do." Jake's tone was rising too, now. "Overreacting? Really? Watch me overreact then." And just like that, Tina grabbed her coffee and threw it right in Jake's face. The cafe went silent for a split second before erupting into murmurs. Jake sat there, coffee dripping down his face, shirt ruined, looking completely lost. Tina stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I couldn't just watch. I grabbed a handful of napkins and walked over to Jake's table. Hey, looks like you could use these, I said, offering the napkins. Jake looked up, a bit dazed. Thanks, he stammered, taking the napkins and starting to clean himself up. No problem. People go nuts sometimes, huh? I tried to sound casual, but inside I felt sorry for the guy. Yeah, you could say that. I'm Jake, by the way. He managed a weak smile. Sarah. And, well, it's nice to meet you, Jake, even under these unique circumstances. He chuckled, a sound of relief amidst the awkwardness. Unique is one way to put it. We stood there for a moment, the awkwardness hanging in the air. You know what? Let me buy you a coffee. The least I can do after, well, that. It was an impulsive offer, but something about this whole scene felt like it needed a better ending. Jake looked at me, a bit surprised. You don't have to do that. But, sure. Thanks. I could use another one, minus the facial. We found a new table, away from the scene of the coffee crime. As the waitress brought over 2 fresh cups, we started to talk. Turns out, Jake worked in IT, loved old school rock. He had a way of telling stories that made even the most ordinary things sound interesting. Hours flew by as we talked about everything and nothing. I told him about my job, my love for mystery novels, and my failed attempts at gardening. As the cafe began to empty, we realized we'd been talking for a long time. Exchanging numbers felt like the most natural thing in the world. After the coffee shop debacle, I didn't expect much. Maybe a few texts, a couple of awkward phone calls. But with Jake, it was different. We clicked like we'd known each other for years. A week after the incident, we met up for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a local burger joint. He was there before me, waiting outside. Our banter was easy, comfortable. We ordered our food, and the conversation flowed just as easily as it had in the cafe. We talked about movies, music, and our love for cheesy horror films. Our burgers arrived, and we dug in. Eating with Jake felt like hanging out with an old friend. There was no awkwardness, just laughs and good food. After dinner, we decided to take a walk. The night was warm, and the streets were lively with people enjoying the evening. So, Sarah, what's your story? Jake asked, genuinely interested. I told him about growing up in a small town, moving to the city for college, and never leaving. He listened, nodding and asking questions. What about you? How'd you end up in IT? I asked. Well, I've always been the tech guy in the family. Figured I might as well get paid for it, he joked. We walked and talked, losing track of time. It was getting late, but neither of us wanted the night to end. Hey, you want to grab a coffee? Or is it too soon for more coffee-related experiences? Jake asked, a playful glint in his eye. I laughed. Sure, why not? But this time, let's keep the coffee in the cups. We found a late-night cafe and settled in with our coffees. The conversation turned more personal. We shared our dreams, our fears, and our silly quirks. I never thought I'd meet someone like you, especially not in a situation like that, Jake said, his tone serious for a moment. Life's weird. You get coffee thrown at you one day, and the next, you're here with someone who gets you, I replied, feeling a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. As the night turned into early morning, we finally said our goodbyes. Walking home, I couldn't help but feel excited about what the future might hold. Jake wasn't just a guy I met in a cafe, he was someone special, someone who could be a big part of my life. After a few months of dating Jake, it was time to meet his parents. I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Meeting the folks is always a bit of a gamble. Jake kept saying they were a bit old-fashioned, but I didn't expect what was coming. The drive to their place was filled with Jake's attempts to prep me. Just ignore any weird comments my mom makes. She's unique, Jake said, glancing at me with an apologetic smile. Unique, huh? That's one way to put it. What should I expect? I asked, feeling a bit uneasy. You know, the usual. Overprotective mom stuff. She might throw in a few odd questions. Just roll with it, he replied. We pulled up to a neat little house with a well-kept garden. It looked welcoming enough. Jake's dad, Mr. Henderson, greeted us at the door. He was a tall, gentle-looking man with a warm smile. Jake, Sarah, welcome. We're so glad you could come. Please, come in, he said, ushering us inside. The living room was cozy, filled with family photos and knickknacks. Then I saw the bookshelf. It was packed with all sorts of books on esotericism, mystical stuff, and one that caught my eye, How to Recognize a Witch. Odd choice for light reading. Jake's mom, Mrs. Henderson, came in from the kitchen. She was a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes that seemed to size me up the moment she saw me. So, you're Sarah. Jake's told us so much about you, she said, her tone polite but cold. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. Jake's told me a lot about you too, I replied, trying to sound cheerful. We sat down for dinner, and that's when the real fun began. Mrs. Henderson was like a sniper, her comments sharp and targeted. I see you like to keep your hair short, Sarah. Is that for convenience, or are you making a statement? She asked, eyeing my haircut. I was taken aback but managed to reply, oh, just for convenience. Easier to manage, you know? I see. I always believed a woman's hair was her crown, she said, almost dismissively. Jake's dad tried to change the subject. So, Sarah, Jake tells us you're in trading. That must be interesting. Yeah, it's pretty engaging. Markets are always changing, keeps me on my toes, I said, grateful for the change in topic. The conversation moved to safer grounds for a while. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't done yet. So, Jake, what happened to that nice girl you were seeing before? The lawyer, what was her name? Tina? She turned to Jake, a pointed look in her eyes. Jake choked on his water. Mom, I'm with Sarah now. Tina is in the past. Oh, I'm just making conversation. No harm meant, Mrs. Henderson said, but her tone said otherwise. Dinner continued with a few more jabs from Mrs. Henderson. By the time dessert came around, I was ready to bolt out the door. Jake kept giving me apologetic looks, but what could he do? We made our excuses soon after dessert, saying we had a long drive back. Mr. Henderson was a gracious host, thanking us for coming. Mrs. Henderson's goodbye was cooler, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. In the car, Jake was silent for a while before he spoke. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I didn't think she'd be that direct. It's okay, Jake. I knew it wasn't going to be a walk in the park. But hey, at least we survived, right? I tried to lighten the mood. Yeah, survived and learned. Next time, we're meeting at a neutral location. Away from any witch-hunting books, he said, trying to joke. I laughed, but inside, I couldn't help but feel a bit rattled. Mrs. Henderson had made quite an impression, and not a good one. I wondered what I had gotten myself into. Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, but it had a shadow hanging over it, Jake's mom, Mrs. Henderson. After that first dinner, things hadn't improved much, and her attitude was always a bit frosty. We'd sent the invite, but deep down, I had a sinking feeling. The ceremony was beautiful, simple but perfect. We had it in a small garden, just close family and friends. But as I walked down the aisle with my dad, I couldn't help but notice the empty seat where Mrs. Henderson should have been. Jake noticed too, I could see it in his eyes. After the ceremony, during the reception, Jake pulled me aside. Hey, I just wanted to say. I'm sorry my mom didn't show. I know it means a lot to have everyone here. he said, his voice tinged with disappointment. I took his hand. Hey, it's okay. Today's about us, remember? Not who's not here. Let's just enjoy our day. He smiled, but I could tell he was hurt. You're right. Let's make the most of it. The rest of the evening went by in a blur of congratulations, dancing, and laughter. But there was a moment, just before the cake cutting, when Jake's dad, Mr. Henderson, came over. Sarah, Jake, I just want to apologize for my wife's absence. I know it's not ideal, but please know, she wishes you well, he said, his eyes sincere. We appreciate that, Mr. Henderson. Thank you for being here, I replied, trying to keep the mood light. Call me John, please. And I wouldn't miss this for the world. You two are perfect for each other, he said, giving us both a warm smile. Despite the snub from his mom, our wedding day was everything I'd hoped for. It was the start of our new life together, just me and Jake, against whatever the world threw at us. And I couldn't have been happier. A few weeks into our married life, Jake and I had settled into our cozy apartment. Life was smooth until an unexpected invitation arrived from Jake's mom, Mrs. Henderson, for a dinner at their place. Considering her absence at our wedding, this was a surprise. Saturday evening, we arrived at Jake's parents' house. The familiar neat garden, the well-kept house, it all seemed too normal. Mrs. Henderson greeted us at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome, Jake, Sarah. So glad you could come, she said, her tone polite but strained. We sat down for dinner in their dining room, the air filled with the aroma of roasted meat and herbs. Mr. Henderson was his usual welcoming self, trying to make small talk. Mrs. Henderson, however, had a different agenda. So, Sarah, how's the married life? Must be a change from your single days. She started off, eyeing me critically. It's wonderful, thank you. Jake and I are very happy, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. That's nice to hear. Marriage is a serious commitment, after all, she said, her eyes flickering towards Jake. Then, without any warning, she dropped a bombshell. You know, Jake, I bumped into Tina the other day. Remember her? Your ex? She's doing quite well. A shame things didn't work out between you two, Mrs. Henderson said casually, as if this was normal dinner conversation. Jake's fork clattered against his plate. Mom, why are you bringing this up now? That's not appropriate. Mrs. Henderson continued, ignoring Jake's discomfort. I just think it's a shame. Tina was such a perfect match for you, beautiful, smart. Not to mention, her family background is impeccable. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. This was beyond inappropriate. Mrs. Henderson, I don't think this is the right time or place to discuss Jake's ex-girlfriends, I interjected, trying to stay calm. She turned her sharp gaze on me. Oh, but I think it's very appropriate, Sarah. After all, I wonder how my son, who was so in love with such a perfect girl, ended up with, well, you. Jake slammed his hand on the table, standing up. Mom, that's enough. You can't talk to Sarah like that. Mrs. Henderson didn't back down. Oh, I'm just stating the facts. It's almost like she bewitched you. You were never like this before. Bewitched? Really, Mom? This is ridiculous, Jake exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. Yes, bewitched. You were always such a rational boy. And then you meet Sarah and suddenly everything changes? It's like she's cast a spell on you, Mrs. Henderson accused, her eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and unspoken accusations. I felt sick to my stomach. Jake and I quickly excused ourselves after that, not even finishing dinner. Life after the dinner fiasco was a mix of anger and disbelief. Jake and I had agreed to keep our distance from Mrs. Henderson for a while. But as they say, life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and Jake and I were lounging in our living room, still in our PJs, when we heard a knock on the door. I peeked through the peephole and my heart sank. It was Mrs. Henderson. I shook my head, opening the door reluctantly. Mrs. Henderson, what a surprise. Is everything okay? Oh, Sarah, Jake, I just wanted to talk. May I come in? She asked, her voice unusually soft. We exchanged a glance, both of us hesitant. But we let her in, not wanting to cause a scene outside. We sat in the living room, an awkward silence filling the space. Mrs. Henderson was the first to break it. I know the last time we met didn't go well. I wanted to apologize. I may have overstepped, she started, her voice low. Jake raised an eyebrow. Overstepped? Mom, you accused Sarah of witchcraft. I know, and I'm sorry. It's just, I worry about you, Jake. You're my son. And Sarah, I may have misjudged you, Mrs. Henderson said, looking at me. I wasn't sure if I bought it. Misjudged? Mrs. Henderson, you called me a witch and suggested Jake go back to his ex. She nodded, her eyes on her lap. I know, and I regret it. I want us to start over, be a family. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mom, it's not that simple. What you said hurt both of us. It's going to take time to get past that. I understand. I just want you to know, I'm willing to try. For the sake of our family, she insisted, her voice earnest. We talked for a bit longer, the conversation strained but polite. Mrs. Henderson kept saying she wanted to make things right, but something about it didn't sit well with me. It all felt a bit too rehearsed. As the day went on, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling. Something about her visit didn't add up. It was too sudden, too out of the blue. And then I noticed it, my favorite comb was missing, and so was the handkerchief I kept on the dresser. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off as being forgetful. In the weeks following Mrs. Henderson's odd visit, a peculiar pattern emerged. She started calling me regularly, which was strange in itself, given our strained relationship. But it was the nature of her inquiries that really unsettled me. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. Seeing Mrs. Henderson's name on the caller ID, I braced myself for the conversation. Hello, Mrs. Henderson, I greeted, trying to keep my tone neutral. Sarah, dear, how are you feeling? Everything okay, with your health? Her voice carried an unusual note of concern. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. Just busy with usual stuff, I replied, slightly confused by her interest in my well-being. That's good to hear. Do take care, she responded, her tone dropping to what sounded like disappointment before she hung up. These calls became a regular occurrence, each one echoing the last. She would ask about my health, and upon hearing I was fine, her voice would deflate in a way that suggested she was hoping for a different answer. Jake found it strange too, but he suggested maybe his mom was trying to mend things in her own way. Then, out of the blue, Mrs. Henderson invited us over for dinner. Jake was hesitant, given her recent behavior, but he thought it might be a chance for her to make amends. We arrived at their house on a cool Friday evening. Mrs. Henderson greeted us at the door with a polite smile, but I noticed a tense look in her eyes. During dinner, the conversation was stilted, filled with awkward pauses. Then, Jake, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. Mom, I've actually been feeling unwell lately. Just can't seem to shake this cold, he said, a hint of frustration in his voice. The moment he said that, Mrs. Henderson's face drained of color. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Her hand went to her mouth, and she staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. Jake, what do you mean you've been sick? Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide with shock. Yeah, it's been a few weeks now. Just a persistent cold, but it's annoying, Jake explained, looking concerned at his mother's reaction. Mrs. Henderson swayed on her feet and then, to our utter shock, fainted right there in the dining room. After Mrs. Henderson regained consciousness, a tense silence hung over the room. Her eyes, red and watery, were fixed on Jake, who looked both worried and confused. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you faint like that?" Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. Mrs. Henderson took a deep, shaky breath. "I have to confess something," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did something terrible because I thought Sarah was." Jake urged her to continue. "Thought Sarah was what, Mom?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then continued with a tremble in her voice. "I thought Sarah had bewitched you. So, I made a voodoo doll to get rid of her, but I think I used your hair by mistake." The room fell into a stunned silence. I felt a chill run down my spine. "A voodoo doll? Of me?" I managed to say, my voice trembling with disbelief and shock. "Yes," Mrs. Henderson whispered, reaching under her chair to pull out a small, crudely made doll. Strands of hair were tied around it, and its appearance sent a wave of dread through me. Jake's face turned from concern to horror. "You did what? Mom, that's insane. You can't seriously believe in that stuff." Mr. Henderson, who had been quiet, now stood up, his face a mix of shock and anger. "Martha, what have you done? This is beyond anything I could have imagined." Jake was visibly shaking with anger. "I can't believe this, Mom. You've taken your superstitions too far. I can't deal with this right now." He stood up abruptly, signaling that we were leaving. I followed him, still in shock, barely able to process what had just been revealed. The next few days were a blur. We saw a doctor, who confirmed Jake just had a bad flu. Mrs. Henderson's actions, while disturbing, had no real impact on his health. Over the next few days, Jake didn't speak to his mother. He was deeply hurt and couldn't come to terms with her actions. His father, Mr. Henderson, called us a few days later. He was distraught and apologized profusely for his wife's behavior. He revealed that he was considering a divorce, unable to live with the reality of what she had done. We knew that moving forward, things would never be the same with Jake's family. But we also knew that as long as we had each other, we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The incident with the voodoo doll was a shocking revelation, but it also reinforced the strength of our bond.